Alright, so back to this. Was originally going to do the next part for the Lain game, right? But I nearly forgot to do this, but again, wanted to make sure I do this first, right? As I've actually already done a black screen video on the Lain game before. It was pretty early on, after like 2 or 3 parts. But again, kind of went over the game and its relation to the show. Kind of everything there, but again, this one is, as you can tell, after, or as you can tell by the title, right? After Site A, and I don't want to say when we're about halfway through, because I don't think that's what that is. Like, should theoretically be slightly more, but again, kind of who knows, right? Site B is less, but it's also something where there's probably like some extra content, once you're done with both, but who knows, right? We're not at that point yet, which is why I'm making this. But again, we're basically done with Site A, and this is kind of a black screen video to kind of, I guess, recap where we are thus far, like the story and kind of everything, Lain's character progression, development, stuff like that, and kind of, take a step back and kind of go over what we went through during the first part of the game, right? So that's what this is for. And again, different from that first black screen video where it's kind of the game in general, right? In relation to our things. This is about, okay, how far we've come, where we've gone to. So that we can kind of get into it. So again, first things first, what I'll say, and I even mentioned this, I'm pretty sure, in that black screen video, I enjoy the game more than the show. Reason being, again, the story is much more comprehensive and concrete and grounded, right? As opposed to the show where it's much more, interpretive and kind of, not elevated, but like, there's a better term, up to interpretation, and then, again, yeah, like there was a better term that I use, but where it's much more Jesus Christ, I can't think of it. Not elevated, but it's like taking a step back, it's much more, God fucking damn it, this shit pisses me off. I don't know how this always happens. I swear I must have like Alzheimer's or something, but again, yeah, you understand the point I'm trying to make regarding the show, right? So again, yeah, just, this is gonna piss me off, but again, the point being, it's actually tangible, and you can tell what's going on in the game, and that's not something to where I know exactly. The turnaround is that people are gonna be like, oh, you're just not, smart enough or whatever, to get it right or follow along. But again, that's specifically how it feels like this. I feel like they're, in a sense, almost not gain it, because it's the same type of people who will say that are the same type of people who also, again, aren't aware, or at least don't pick up on the fact that some of it's left up to interpretation, right? And that some of it's a bit, God, I can't fucking think of the art term. This is going to piss me off. Some of it is, it's like a top-down view where it's like, I swear I must have like dementia, but they don't get that it's more of a, again, they don't get that's more of, it's not as like, concrete, right? Some of it is in fact left up to an interpretation. Again, same type of people that, again, are trying to act as if there's like a correct interpretation, right? Ironically enough, but again, the point being, there's no real question what's going on with the story of the game, even though, which I'll touch on later, we don't have all the bits and pieces. So that's the first thing, right? That's partially why I enjoy it more, is because it focuses much more on that. But in turn, it also focuses a lot more on Lain's character development and progression, right? In the show, we kind of see, again, we see that slightly, but the change is more so regarding, again, herself with the Wired. The big difference between the show and the game is that the Wired doesn't really seem to be a thing, so all of the character progression development we see regarding Lain, are from other external factors. Again, the big thing there being, obviously, the internet and networking is still a thing, and she still has an innate ability when it comes to that, but it's not like the show where it's all around the wire. That's just kind of a part of it. What goes on kind of outside with, her friends, her family, her therapist being the big one, is where we see a lot more of that, development and progression, specifically, again, regarding the therapist, right? As some of the most interesting interactions we get in the game are between her and her therapist, between her and her therapist's assessments of her, right, via the diagnoses, as well as each of their diary entries, right? Like, again, that's some of the most interesting information we get, and some of the way we can tell the most about them is from that. So again, just very, very interesting there compared to like the show, to where we're trying to film bits and pieces, right? And try to figure stuff out. It's very, I guess, apparent and forefront in the game there, right? But it also shows again a lot more of that development and progression. It's not solely reliant on, The Wired, right, and its impact versus just kind of how things have been going on in general. So a lot more grounded there. So there's that, right? So I prefer the game over the show. I don't want to get more into that. I still can't think of the fucking term I was going to use to describe the show, but I guess who knows, right? Again, like, it's going to piss me off the fact that I can't think of the term, but, I guess, whatever, right? Yeah, but with what we've seen up in the game, right, I think, again, and I kind of touched on this during, the gameplay, right, is, again, the very, probably the most interesting thing is, again, the interactions between her and her therapist, right? And that's the big thing we gained out of this. Because it's almost interesting, because that's kind of like the one consistent that has been going throughout the game, right? Those like therapy sessions with her diagnoses, but we can kind of base all the other events with her friends and family around that. So, like, for example, her initial friend group in grade school, right, with like Kyoko, Tomo and whatnot, right, kind of the falling out with Kyoko, her going to middle school, meeting her other friend, God, I don't even remember her name. That's bad, but yeah, her other friend, right, kind of having almost a falling out with her. Again, her family, right? Her family starting out nice and fine, and then ended up having like a breakup. Obviously the online, the wide presence, right? We see her again get her first computer, Navi, starts, mess online, right, with email and stuff, get some like, encrypted messages, decrypt them, to something like nasty and disgusting, and then get back at the people who encrypted her, meeting Mr. Rabbit, kind of everything going along there, right? And then also just what would you call it, I guess, her like studying up, reading up on, not just programming, coding, but psychology too, right? Kind of gain a greater understanding of herself, her mental state, kind of honestly progressing. Like, I hate to say it, for as bad of a job as Toko did, it seemed like Lain was genuinely making progress and getting better, but I feel like by the end that's just all kind of out the window, right? And again, it's something to where not only just on her hallucinations, delusions, but also her other self, and again, kind of everything going on, right? I feel like the biggest thing is kind of all of this, and we see, it starts to kind of like, because it originally starts off chronological in a solid timeline, but then it kind of deviates a little from one another, which isn't that big of a deal, because by that point we also have kind of gaps in our knowledge. But something to where, unfortunately, by the end of Site A, all of it kind of comes to a, boiling point, right? And, stop, like, again, well, like, it's a stoppage and like spillage there where everything kind of goes wrong, and then Lain kind of just ends up losing her identity and sense of self, right, by the end of the first Site. I mean, we see one of the last movies, she's literally like, who is Lain? Like, who are you, right? Like, again, it's very interesting to go off, because we also see the one where she breaks the mirror, and it's like, what's she about to do there, right? Again, I think that's very interesting, but yeah, again, that's kind of where you leave off. In, again, I think the interesting point in where I'm going to kind of turn this towards, okay, what's Site B going to look like? Where are we going to get out of that? The thing there is, once I found out there were kind of gaps in our knowledge, and there was some missing nodes, right? I had figured, okay, Site B we'll go through Site A, Site B will kind of have the rest that will fill in those gaps. That is not the case. Site B continues on from where Site A leaves off, which is very interesting. I guess that means there will just be some inherent gaps, in our like knowledge and kind of, again, within the story. But again, since we've been going chronological, we can pretty much piece it together. It's not really that big of an issue. But again, kind of the big thing there is just, yeah, because it raised the question of where it's going to go, now that it's continuing to the future and doesn't end where Site A ends, Again, I said, kind of what's the end goal end game. We know Site A ends at 8th grade, supposedly given Toko's diary entries, but it's kind of questionable whether that's entries in the past and or it's just because that supposedly means that they've been counseling for 3 years, if that's correct. Or if it's something where it's like, okay, she's kind of like lying and making shit up and going to use. I guess it wouldn't make sense though, because you wouldn't use your own personal diaries, as like sort of evidence, or like history or whatever, you need to like document patients. So who knows, right? But again, seemingly the big thing there and from that is, what would you call it? Again, right, is that what it comes down to there, and the big thing with that is it's like, I mean, I guess, yeah, what is the end goal and end game? I said, and we even saw this at the beginning. Toka said, uh, what would you call it? There's only like a borderline chance that Lain would be able to live a normal life. That was like from the very start. I don't want to say that's, again, I feel like with the end of Site A kind of destroyed any hopes of that. I hate to say any possibility. I feel like it's an uphill battle at this point. Like I said, because again, it's not gonna go like the show where it's like, okay, Lain just mind wipes everyone, right? It seems to be, the game is taking a much more grounded and concrete approach. But I can see the end game being potentially either suicide, unfortunately, if that's the case, or kind of, I guess, maybe her just like maybe going through complete amnesia or just kind of learning to accept, and or live with her condition. I feel like there's a very, low shot that she actually makes a recovery and is able to, I guess, live a normal life, so to speak. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Again, one thing I noticed when scrolling through Site B's, again, entries, that there's a lot of movies and a lot more Toko entries. So seemingly she doesn't get moved like she wanted to. But again, who knows? We'll see. It's just, again, it's very interesting there, and I find it very, intriguing, kind of what they've like done with that, I guess is a good way to put it. Again, it's something to where, I guess my big thing is, again, it's not exactly chronological. I know we're not exactly getting the exact timeline, but we can get enough of it to where we can kind of piece together what's going on. The big thing is, again, there seem to be a bit staggered, but it is what it is, right? It's something to where, the big thing with that is, and what that comes down to is, again, but I guess that's kind of the whole personalized experience. Because when I was going into it, I knew a decent amount about the game, right? I knew there were like these modules. I knew what they were going to be comprised of. I knew that you had the 2 different sites, how many levels there were. I knew that, okay, it was going to be, I thought you would only be able to jump through, the choices you had in each one of them, which would have been a pain in the ass. But luckily, we've been able to kind of do it chronologically, so it hasn't been too bad. But yeah, the only thing I pretty much didn't know was what was exactly in them, And I guess, again, the big question I guess we had was, is it, like a prequel? Does it take place like before the show? And then get into it there. I don't think so. I hate, like, that was my original thought, but then, there are a couple main reasons why I think otherwise. The big thing is the problem with Lain getting her kind of Navi computer and getting into the online and like internet and networking portion within the, again, within the game, right? Because if it were a prequel, we see her get into that in the show. So it's something where it wouldn't really make sense there. And then another thing is, again, our friend groups are pretty much completely different. Again, it's something to where it's like, I don't remember the second girl's name, which is bad. But again, the first girl, Kyoko, and then Tomo, right? Again, very different. And also we got the confirmation that she's an only child within the game, right? Which I think versus the show where she is a sister, right? And also her parents seem to be significantly different to where they're actually, like she actually is decent. Okay, I guess they got in a fight at the end of Site A, which sucks, right? But they're actually seemingly, like decent, parents, right? They're not like, versus the show where she kind of has like a deadbeat mother and a dad who I guess, like, I don't want to say isn't it, like her dad doesn't seem too bad in the show. Again, it's just something where what that comes down to is, yeah, the big thing there is it's like, okay, again, just like it's kind of like too late for her at that point, right? And I guess the big thing, kind of what I've assessed and noticed during the game, is that like as opposed to the show where it seemed almost fated that Lain would end up that way. Again, it's debatable and arguable whether kind of the nature of Lain, what she is, her family, stuff like that, whether a normal life was possible. I made my final Black video specifically on that. But again, this is more like it seemed like Lain actually had a natural family, and was just dealing with mental illness and, psychological disease. I mean, they even might bring up Savant syndrome. But again, the thing there being that, it's just kind of a bad case of, again, really her and Toko were honestly quite possibly or probably, the worst combinations for each other, right? You have a high, maintenance, high, I don't want to say demand, but, kind of you have a very challenging client up against a new young green doctor who really, again, isn't in, the best condition to be able to treat them, right? I mean, that's really kind of what we see there. And, with that, something where, again, it's interesting because I feel like, I mean, even she, like, she kind of realizes too late and, and she kind of does so at the expense of Lain, but she tries, get out of, I guess, that partnership, right? Having Lain as her client, but something there to where it feels like, the overall thing of this is how it's just honestly kind of bad luck, or just unlucky that they ended up getting each other, and that, again, like, it's honestly seems like Toko's probably gonna have her career ruined, and then Lain's, mental stay is kind of gonna, like, again, her just, mental stay is gonna be, like, worse off than what it started. Like, the big thing there being that it's just like, like a normal life did seem possible for her, right? Like, and they honestly seem to be going on pretty good track, but it kind of ended up taking a turn for the worse by the end of Site A, and it just didn't seem possible from that point onward. But yeah, with that, right, it's like, again, that's kind of the thing then, what I wanted to notice and point out, but I guess with that, right, again, that pretty much comes to the end of this video. I just wanted to kind of take a moment to pause, like, take a break, and then kind of assess where we are at the end of Site A before I get on Site B, right? It'll be interesting to see where this goes. Again, I hate to say it, I don't see a good ending happening, just due to the nature of the show, like, or I guess the game itself. And, like, Lain herself, right? But, again, I do find it interesting, I enjoy the game more, very much glad I played it, right? Again, and it's something to where I still can't think of that term. It's up for interpretation, and there's another term, and it's a term I've used in other videos. I just can't remember what it is. Abstract. I'm pretty sure it was. I think it was abstract. It's up for interpretation, more abstract there, right? When it comes, maybe not, but that's a good term to describe it. But again, and it's something where it's like, I'll say I'm glad I watched the show first, simply because the game seemingly has no impact and, influence on the show. But, I can take a lot from the show and apply it to the game, right? And kind of like cross-check and or look back, to it. But, yeah, that's the big thing there. And then obviously, what would you call it? Like, it's something to where most people, I feel like, discovered the game through the show rather than vice versa. Even though, ironically enough, the game came out first. But, again, with that, I feel like, honestly, I don't really got much more to say. It's just, we'll play through Site B, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I'm not sure if there's another site, but I do think there's probably going to be some stuff for when we complete Site B, like, onwards, right? Before, again, the game's just completely done, right? But chances are, after Site B, I'll make another Black Stream video. Once that's done, I'll probably end up doing a Civ game. But, again, for now, we're going to do it. And I'm, very much glad I was able to play a Lain game, right? Honestly, like I said, very fun, again, very glad I'm playing it. Like, it's honestly, I'm more invested in this than the show. Like, I think it's fair, but coming up around 20 minutes, so I'm probably gonna here. I don't really have anything else to say on that. So, yep, that's all I've got for this one. That's it for this one. See you in the next one.